Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews, this being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Kung Fu, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I am labeling this as an Untitled Review for now. The show could technically already kind of fit into maybe crime-centric. It could also fit into super fantasy with some of the more magical stuff. I'm not really sure which one to label it as, just because, if you're unaware, I'm kind of anal retentive about that. But for right now, I'm going to label it as Untitled Review, and later episodes as the season progresses, if I feel like it definitely leans more towards the super fantasy, which I'm kind of already feeling that way, then I will just, title these reviews accordingly, so just kind of getting that out of the way. I am not someone who's ever seen the original show that obviously this is based on with David Carradine from like back in the day. I don't think I've ever seen any of the show, so I'm going into this just knowing this modern take on it. I think is kind of how it would kind of be phrase. I guess it's kind of like modern reboot. I guess is kind of the more apt description. But it's interesting. Like the fast forward we kind of get in Nikki's life is kind of like hey, my mom suggested I go to China. Just to kind of check things out. Kind of like I think it was like a cultural trip is what it was meant to be. And she finds out, oh, my mom blindsided me because it's actually trying to get me like a boyfriend, a husband. So she happens to jump into Pei Ling's truck, and it's like, all right, but Pei Ling's like, then maybe this is kind of where this path you've chosen is the path you live, and she ends up studying at a monastery for the past 3 years. Sadly, that monastery gets attacked, and her Shifu is killed by this woman named Jilan, and she ends up stealing what we later on find out is a magical sword being one of 8 weapons that were basically empowered by a sorcerer. Hence why I want to label this as a super fantasy, but I didn't. Who knows? Maybe during the review process I will change this to a super fantasy. I don't know. I'll shut up now. But it was up to her to try and get the sword back. So she fights Jilan, but obviously ends up losing, and Jilan ends up kicking her off a cliff, very 300 style. Luckily, Nikki survived. She tells about it later on. I thought was kind of interesting. Like I said, you kind of like everything just kind of happens really fast. We never actually found out what happened to everyone else at the monastery. Did everyone just scatter? Like we saw some of the students fighting back, but we don't know whether they won. We saw maybe some that were dead. I think they looked knocked out, but I think some of them were dead just because probably didn't want to make it super bloody and obvious because just this isn't that network. I don't know what this TV show is rated. It might be like 14 and not. I mean, it might be like PG and not like TV 14 because I didn't even realize, like, for example, Charmed is PG. Would have expected that to be like TV 14 or something. But it's like, no, it's PG. I was like, oh, that's interesting. You never really know with ratings. Ratings are weird like that. Regardless. So I don't know if she's the only one because Nikki didn't really talk about it, but because like I said, a lot of stuff was happening fast. She needs to find Jilan. She talked about the fact that she did go to the police, but the moment she brought up like the sword and everything, it's like, oh, what? Oh yeah, they got KG and they were like, get out of here quick. So that kind of got probably swept under the rug to a certain extent. But for her, she didn't have anywhere else to go but to go back home. As she talks about it, like her current home was destroyed, so she has to go back home, which she hasn't been back in 3 years. It seems like she also lost contact with her family in that 3 years. Not lost contact, just didn't go out of her way to reach out because she kind of cut ties to a certain extent because she was trying to, for so long, her life had been determined so much by more so her mom than anyone else. And so she just wanted to escape to kind of, make her own choices, and spending so long away from home just to end right back up there, which her sister and her dad were the happiest to see her. Her brother Ryan was a little resentful. So was her mom. Her brother, we kind of understand. Like, at first I'm like, man, why is he such a dick? And it's like, I felt abandoned, but we kind of understand a little too, because I think for him, it's like, he was, in the family, she was his rock, his foundation, where it's like, I could tell you everything. He opened up to her as being gay and eventually having to tell his parents. But I think for him, it's like, for Ryan, it's like, I have you and you kind of up and left and abandoned me. So I didn't really have anyone to talk to, which is also kind of a little disparaging against his other sister, because it's like, oh, she's just, I guess it's just him and Nick. Maybe him and Nikki are closer in age, or just they just, I mean, I guess it's understandable. I mean, I didn't even think about it at the time. I was like, right, I don't think Nikki's the baby of the family. She's like the middle child. I don't know the ages of everyone, so I assume like maybe she's the middle child, and her sister's the oldest, and her brother's the young. Maybe they're about. I don't know. I don't know. Regardless, also her sister's getting married. But like getting back to it, like her mom is resentful because it's like, I made so many sacrifices for you. I did this, I did that, and it's like, and it's like, if you were so miserable, why didn't you say anything? And Nikki's just like, she was about to say something, but then she's just like, I'm going to leave. Because I think for her, it's like, I made it, I guess for her, it's like, she never really talks about it, but I think it's a situation of, you didn't really leave much room to decide. It's like, you were making so many decisions for my life. I never really had an opportunity to be like, I don't want to do this. And even if she did, it might be a thing that her mom shut it down. So it's stuff like that. The complicated, family situation of like your family making so many choices and decisions for you that your life is kind of taken out of your hands in certain regards. So, and obviously, coming back home after all these years, it, comes with complications, not just on the family front, but also on the front with her ex, Evan. He's moved on, got a new girlfriend, even being like, oh yeah, this is my friend Nikki. And it's like, oh, that's got to add a little salt to the wound. It's like, yeah, we broke up, but it also sucks because Nikki talks about the fact that they broke up because she's like, I'm sorry, I should have stood up to my mom more and stood up not just for myself, but also for you. She ended up having to give up in the relationship because it's like, I'm sure her mom is like, I mean, once again, the whole China thing, I'm sure it's like, oh, like her mom probably wanted her to find you like a Chinese husband, which, I can understand to a certain extent, because it's like, this is, finding a Chinese husband because you want someone that's going to speak the language and know all the traditions. So, when it comes to that, more likely to find anyone could fit that mold, but I'm sure it's like more likely like, oh, like probably she's probably like comes from a very traditional, old school kind of perspective on the thing. So Evan being white, probably not the best thing, so that's kind of where an element of that comes from. But it is that thing of like, she's so much has kind of changed while she's been away. At first, when she got there, her dad had a black eye. I was like, what's that about? And it's like, I just fell. But then we find out later on he owes like kind of a loan shark some money. But it turns out like her mom had actually gotten like a $50,000 loan, but now that loan shark wants $100,000 interest and all that, right? Because she was falling behind and thought this person was a friend that could help them, but ended up backstabbing them. So. But he isn't just doing it to them. He's doing it to so many other families in the community. So they try to reach out, but none of them are responsive. Understandably so, because it's like, yeah, this guy rules with an iron fist. And it's like, well, if we get involved, then like he's going to know that we talked and we can't let that happen. And so when it's all said and done, it's not till Nikki and Henry, which I'll circle back to that in a little bit, but not till they kick some serious ass that like, one of the people they went to visit, she's like, no, I'll speak up. Like, I was waiting for someone like you guys to kind of come in and kick ass. And the fact is, you're willing to show up and help us like this, then it inspired me that, to stand up to Tony and all his, criminal BS. But really quickly, Nikki and Henry do work really nice together in tandem, like they're fighting. Obviously, Nikki can kind of handle things on her own, but it was just still pretty sick, like, combo. But speaking of Henry, it was kind of a nice introduction between them. I was a little weary is the word I should be saying, of how they met. It's like, oh, we bumped into each other. It's like, oh yeah, Ryan knows Henry, but I'm like, and the fact is he bumped into you. Like I said, I'm always in suspicion mode right now. I'm like, tinfoil hat mode, where I'm like, that was on purpose. Like, this guy, he's going to end up being betray you. He's going to be a, he's actually working with Gilon or something like that. Or maybe he's working on it. I don't know. I'm just like, I'm waiting for the betrayal. I'm just like, you're getting close to him and everything, and he's going to be the one to betray you. It's going to be something like that. I get that inkling. I don't know what, just something about him just rubbed me the wrong way, just the way he ran into her. But it's like, oh, there's chemistry there, sure, but I'm just super suspicious of him. Like I said, tinfoil hat mode. I could most likely be turned out to be super wrong, but for right now, I just get this gut feeling about the dude. It's just something about him running, and he found, like, the fact is he found, like, for one, he's super, like, okay with, well, Evan was kind of super okay with everything that Nikki told him. Granted, she left out some of the more magical aspects of the sword, but he was the one that was so okay with it and just like, yeah, this is kind of my thing. Then I'm like, you jumped on that information, you found it pretty quickly too, and I'm like, you already knew so much about this. Like, that's why, like, because you know that Nikki might be the fastest way to it, because once again, he might be working with Jilan, or he might be someone that's working against Jilan. So it's like, oh, I can use Nikki as a means to an end to get this weapon, because it turns out later on, like, oh yeah, Jilan is actually trying to collect all 8 to be, like, all powerful and stuff like that. So we'll have to wait and see where things kind of go on that front. But like I said, it's interesting because, like, all that, like, the more mystical side of things potentially kind of takes, like, a back seat, because, like, obviously it's about this community. It's about, you know, first and foremost being there for her family, because she feels like she wasn't there for them before, and obviously, like, you know, kind of telling her mom off about, you know, what her mom wanted for her and everything, because it turns out, like, she was in a very similar circumstance where her mom's mom wanted her to her life to be a certain thing, but she, you know, didn't want to do that. And it's like, and she's like, wait, Mom, you ran away too? And she's like, no, of course, I would never do that. And it's like, it's like, oh, it's just like, you know, at one moment she's almost like, wait, we were the same? And then it's also like, oh, like, never mind, you use this as an opportunity to kind of push me down a little bit too, by being like, no, I would never do that. It's so disrespectful and terrible. Almost making it seem like, oh, well, only terrible people run away and stuff like that. But for her, it's like, you've made so many decisions about my life since I was growing up that I just needed a break. I needed to be away so that I can make some choices for myself. Because, you know, so I think her mom kind of learned a little bit from that, not realizing, like, oh, like, it's like you figured out you made choices for me. You planned out my entire life for me. The dream life that wasn't my life. It was the dream life you had for me. Whether it was just because, but I think it also comes from that place of, I don't want you to have to struggle. I push you so hard because I want you to be in a successful place, you know? Because she said that her mom didn't support anything that, like, her mom's mom didn't support her until, like, you know, May had opened up the restaurant and it was successful. Then, like, May's mom was like, oh, it's all good. And then, you know, it's like kind of like actions speak louder than words type of situation. So obviously they can't go down, but circling back, I'm a little all over the place. I do apologize. Early recordings, I'm always a little delirious when I'm doing these. So I do apologize when I'm all over the place. Going back to the Tony situation, obviously they want, like, you have Nikki wanted to handle things on the legal way. Obviously she went to, you know, Evan was he a lawyer, prosecutor, something of the, is he assistant DA or something like that? But regardless, getting his help to, take Tony down, but it's like, well, we got witness statements and stuff like that, sure, but we need something a little bit more concrete. So they end up going through the files, and Nikki's sister ends up being the hacker, and, you know, Ryan being like, yeah, sometimes you forget she's not just, you know, she's more than just a pretty face, that she's, like, hacking and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, because she had brought up earlier, like, that's how her and her fiance met. Like, he was investing in her tech company or something like that. So I'm wondering, is that something we'll see more? Like, is she going to be like, in the words of Spider-Man, is Nikki's sister going to be man in chair, kind of like the tech support, like, helping in that regard? Because it's like, the fact is we're throwing out that whole, like, thing of she hacks and stuff like that. It's going to be pertinent in some shape or form. Also, it helps to have a brother who is also a doctor or a physician. So, like, anytime get a little roughed up, that can probably help on that regard. I am curious though, really quickly, is she going to go, like, I'm sure this is about helping the community and being there, but I'm curious, is she going to be there for the community as herself, or is she going to go a little vigilante, maybe mask up or disguise herself, or, maybe it's like, no, this is me, I'm out in the open helping because I want people to realize, like, oh, it's someone from this community, a fellow person, because that's what she was trying to do, because she was like, that's why we need to let people know who it is, that, like, we need to show them that we're people who look just like them, speak the same language as them, grew up in this community, because people are more likely to listen to people from the community rather than outsiders, because it's like, oh, like, don't stick your nose and so on. And even like Nikki Sutra making a sad joke where she was like, sad joke in the sense of like, oh, it's like, she's like, the first time like not being white actually helped, and it's like, oh, you're like that, sad joke in the sense that like, oh, it's a little too true of like, so that was interesting. But obviously you have Nikki having to, because Ryan went to go get the evidence himself, because he's like, if no one else is going to do anything, I'm going to do it, because he felt like the police couldn't be trusted, because you try to go things the legal route. That's how Tony was able to kind of slip through. There'd always be some loophole. There'd be always some way of none of the charges sticking, because he's got a lot of cops in his pocket. I was actually expecting, like, at that deal he was doing, like, Gillan to like pop up, but that still doesn't mean we won't find out later on some of his dealings have some connection to her. Maybe not. But was all said and done, she protected Ryan, and I thought it was interesting, like, there was almost like this Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of floating moment where she was like up in the air, and even Ryan called it out. He's like, oh my god, it looked like you were kind of like floating in the air. She's like, no. And later on saying, like, I even love it when like Henry's like, yeah, your brother told me you were floating. She's like, why is he telling people that? I didn't float. It was just physics. But I was like, oh, it's so interesting, because like, to my recollection in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, like, the movement, just like, it's just kind of like, and it's the one I always brought up like this during Into the Badlands, because Into the Badlands has similar movement. It's like, to a certain extent, it's a little more fast paced. It's not like as slow motioned as it at least from my recollection of Crouching Tiger. But in like Into the Badlands and in Crouching Tiger, like, no one says anything about it. It's just like, at least I don't think they did. It was always just kind of like, oh, that's just how it is. So the fact is they made note of it must mean like, oh, like maybe there's something going on there. I mean, to be fair, Nikki's also seeing Pei-Ling like all over the place, like her ghost. So like her spirit's there, kind of being a Shifu, and in both life and in death. Maybe her spirit lives on through her. Well, because it's interesting, because she was killed by the sword, and Nikki was scratched was cut by the blade. So I'm wondering, did that transfer some of her soul to Nick? Like, so does she kind of like coexist with Nikki? Is that why, or is that just part of something else? Maybe her reaching, like, almost like some ancient one from like Doctor Strange type of thing, and maybe like even from beyond the grave, she's kind of able to kind of reach out type of thing. I don't know, or maybe it's a manifestation of Nikki's mind needing her Shifu there to kind of guide her. I don't know. We'll see. It's one of those things of like, am I reading too much into it? Most likely. It's probably just a thing of, it's happening, accept it, move on. But yeah, it was a nice wedding celebration at the end. I love that their mom gets on stage and she's singing, and just like Nikki's sister just being so embarrassed by her and stuff like that. But there was, her parents were saying like, Nikki, just move back home, so I think, because obviously for Pei-Ling, it was about, Nikki not only finding her destiny, but also it needs to start with her healing her family situation before moving on to trying to track down Gillan and the sword. And once again, she's trying to collect all 8 magical things, weapons, and once you have control of them, I guess like all-powerful being, no one can stop you, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of take us with all of this. I think it's a really nice introduction, just kind of letting you get to know Nikki and her family. But like I said, I'm curious. From what I saw, the trailers, it was mainly stuff in this episode. Like I said, it seems like the CW kind of does that a lot with a lot of its trailers. It's just usually stuff in the first episode. So I'm really curious to kind of get into the flow of like what the rest of the season is going to be like. Obviously, Nikki kind of readjusting the life back in San Francisco, but also maybe we'll kind of cut back kind of to one of those, kind of almost like Arrow, like the whole like, oh, Oliver cutting back to his time in Leanne. You maybe would do something kind of similar, cutting back to Nikki's time in the monastery, like lessons and experiences she had and how they, she applies them to her life now. The fact that she's seeing Pei Ling now in her head, like, maybe that kind of compensates for that, so you won't necessarily get the flashbacks. Like I said, I'd also love to know, like, what the hell happened to everyone else at the monastery? Are they dead too, or what? But also, obviously, I brought up earlier that Nikki wants to fight for the community. So, are we going to see like her helping defeat, more local gangs and stuff like that? I'm just curious at the end of the day to see like what the flow and structure of the show is going to be. It's really interesting. Obviously, we're going to get a lot of awesome like action sequences, but just aside from that, I'm just curious to give some idea of just like I said, just the structuring of like what we can kind of expect. Like, obviously we have the overarching plot, but like what elements are going to lead up to there, like I said, taking down other gangs, like your toning gangs, or what. I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.